There's no big revelations since we met last time, I'm assuming. So then we go to the Ukraine issue. And I guess one of the interesting issues was revealed, and Sarah and Johan no doubt saw this. I saw it. There was an article that, let me turn down the music here. There was an article testifying to the fact that Russia sent some fighter planes into sovereign Swedish airspace with nuclear weapons on board the Russian fighter jets. Yes, Johan might be more familiar.
Again, yeah, go Johan. Again over Gotland, of course. My place.
Of course, Gotland. I think we should probably sink it so nobody takes that big ass hangar ship.
No.
You see, you need your bunker.
No, apparently there were 4 jets. 2 of them were hunter killers, we attack planes, and 2 of them were bombers. And the bombers are suspected to each one holding 2 what could be nuclear warheads. But again, it might be dummies. It could be an empty pod, but it had the size and the exterior of these short flight cruise missiles that they are dropping to these kinds of planes. So yes,
as our very
so comfortable.
No, but as our very non-diplomatic politicians were saying here, when they were being very un-Swedish well, Swedes understand what I mean by that word, in the way that they were saying, we're beginning to call them photo opportunities. Photo ops, they just want to be close enough so that we see.
I read in an article today that Putin is most likely not getting the real war facts from the military. Maybe they want to prevent some nuclear war with that. I'm not sure why, but it was in a Washington article. The Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, it has been discussed in Swedish media as well, that there is indication that he doesn't get the correct information. And this actually align with another elderly man in a bunker in another town about 70 miles from Moscow, 1945. He didn't either get correct information during his last days. Johan done.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else with the Ukraine story since we met last time?
I actually have another one. Apparently, our British friends have sent a new shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missile to our Ukrainian friends. And this is actually a shoulder pad launcher that instead of having a rocket aimed for the airplane, they actually have 3 darts of deflated uranium that they shoot at 2,000 miles per hour, not 2,000 kilometers per hour, 2,000 miles per hour. And that is quite blasting fast. And this is a purely kinetic weapon, so it doesn't have any warhead or explosive. It's just a kinetic energy, and it would probably punch straight through whatever it hits. So it will even work on the Iskanders if they can target it.
Okay. One of the articles that came out in the past 24 hours is from The Guardian from 9 hours ago. It says that Ukraine says fierce resistance has pressured Russian forces out of Kyiv, but Ukraine is preparing for stronger Russian strikes in other regions, specifically in the east, kind of Russian sympathetic border towns there in the Donbass. So that's one of the changes on the map there. Anything else that caught anyone else's eye before we go into the big tech headlines?
It says Russians start to withdraw from Chernobyl.
And it seems that some of them were affected by radi- radiation, but it's not confirmed yet. Yeah, and another one is that the U.S. have announced gonna release the oil reserve that might help Germany's situation as well.
So there's
Yeah.
Sky News 3 hours ago came out with one that says that the UK, because Sky News is from the UK announces 14 new sanctions against Russian propagandists and state media outlets and military figures, including someone they're calling the Butcher of Mariupol. And historians will kind of sense the connection between a phrase like that, naming one of the Russian military leaders, branding them as the Butcher of Mariupol. That was I haven't seen names like that since World War II. Although that historically names like that were attached. It's just weird to, and I don't. I'm not saying it's not warranted. I think somebody should be. If somebody is leading the attack on Mariupol, that person certainly does deserve a title like Butcher of Mariupol. But it does put them into a category along with very high-profile members of the Nazi Party, for example. Yeah, Ukraine. It's time running. Okay, so anyone else with a yes? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there was the article that Russians are drafting or drafted 134,500, but the military say that they won't go to Ukraine. I'm not sure what what logic that makes, but apparently the defense ministry asked people to sign up, but ensuring that they won't go to Ukraine, which is really weird to me. But
They wouldn't be a lot of use in Ukraine anyway. That this soon after they signed up, they're gonna take some time to be trained and so forth. Plus, I think Russia have a regular annual conscription intake like that. So we want to make sure that it's any different to any other year, because news has a habit of highlighting things that are usual and recurring, and trying to tie them to current events. And then, the other thing is, as I say, they're going to take a while to become useful. Even their troops that have been training for many years don't seem to be that useful. So, ones that have just signed up off the street, not too much to worry about.
Okay, two others that just came out. One from Al Jazeera in the past few hours says Russia may have committed war crimes in Ukraine, according to UN rights chief Michelle Bachelet warns Russia may have committed war crimes by killing civilians and destroying hospitals in Ukraine. Addressing the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on Wednesday, she urged Russia to end its 5-week invasion, adding that the entire population of Ukraine has been enduring a living nightmare. Quote, homes and administrative buildings, hospitals and schools, water stations and electricity systems have not been spared. Indiscriminate attacks are prohibited under international humanitarian law and may amount to war crimes. She said her office had received credible allegations that Russian forces had used cluster munitions in populated areas at least 24 times. Her office was also investigating alleged use of cluster munitions by Ukraine. Russia has denied using such weapons or targeting civilians since launching on February 24th what it calls a special operation to disarm and denazify its neighbor, as we've all heard endless times. And to that, I saw a really interesting tweet a few hours ago that the mayor of, was it Mariupol? I think it was, who was apprehended momentarily and then was released or escaped, or was the Ukrainians managed to free him. He's now telling some of what he encountered while he was held prisoner by the Russians. And he spoke to the Russian soldiers, and the exchange was a very interesting one, where they said they were there to support the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And he says, well, I'm the mayor. Oh, no, their first main objective according to them, according to him, is that they were there to kind of smoke out the Nazis who had taken over. And he says, well, I'm the mayor and I've lived in this town for 30 years and I've yet to meet a Nazi in this town. And they said, well, we're here to benefit the Russian-speaking demographic in the population. And he says, 95% of the citizens of this town speak Russian, and we're absolutely fine without you, and we don't welcome you. And then they said some even far less impressive defense of their why they were there. I'm trying to remember what the third reason that was given, but it was meaningless. And he was very swift in assuring them that that was a pointless, that they had been pawns in a game, and that they had been basically just following propaganda, and they were risking their own lives, based on propaganda. And that was one of the more interesting tweet threads I saw in the past few hours.
There's one more.
Go ahead. I have one more too. Go ahead.
Apparently Putin is being misled by his advisors who are too scared to tell him how badly the war is in Ukraine. According to US intelligence and according to British intelligence, he says that the Russian troops in Ukraine are demoralized, short of equipment, and refusing to carry out orders.
I saw that one as well.
And the Kremlin said the US had a total misunderstanding of the situation. Oh, wow.
Right. Hold on one second. What?
I painted on top of the room.
Where? Oh, the key? That's mine. Okay, I saw that one as well, and I thought that was kind of interesting that, although, I mean, we said that even the day Putin went in, I remember suggesting, and I think I'm in a. There's a lot of people who thought the same, that Putin clearly is just surrounded himself with people who can't tell him what's really going on. And that's why he's found himself kicking this bee's nest repeatedly. So that seems to make a lot of sense, that they are incapable of giving him the facts of what's happening on the ground, and that's why things are so screwed up, and why they seem to be so ineffective. And there was an other related article that and by the way, just to be clear, that article that Cheryl just shared, the source of that is the U.S. intelligence, right? Now,
yes.
the Ukrainian intelligence in the past 24 hours has come out to say that they have inside sources inside the Kremlin. And no doubt that might be totally bullshit, and that might be intentionally to fuck with Putin's head. But it doesn't matter, because even if it's true or not, it's going to fuck with his head. Because this guy is acting in a very paranoid way, as authoritarian leaders eventually do. So, well played to the Ukrainian intelligence community for coming out and announcing that they have leaky lips and sources inside the Kremlin, because that's going to drive Putin batshit crazy in the next few hours. No doubt that's not going to help the Kremlin in any shape, way, or form. That's gonna provoke the paranoid Putin. So, one last article that I have is from The Guardian. In the past 24 hours, it says it was updated 10 minutes ago that Russia, Ukraine, NATO warns Russian forces are regrouping in new attacks. Fresh hope for Mariupol evacuation. Up to 45 buses will be sent to Mariupol to evacuate civilians, Ukraine says, while NATO says Russian forces are regrouping rather than withdrawing from there. And it's because that particular town is particularly geographically, strategically paramount of importance. If you look at the map, you'll understand why. And it seems to be they're giving up on Kyiv. And so now you're going to have an intensification of both sides in the east, which I have to say, this kind of, I think, tips the odds in favor of Ukraine as things move forward, because the supply chains will be easier and more solid from the west, from Poland and everything else. Anyway, fingers crossed that things work out. Anyone else with a Ukraine-related story? Russian troops withdraw from Chernobyl, suffering from radiation poisoning as they were kind of walking through quarantined areas of Chernobyl without much regard for their own health and safety. Now they're paying the consequences. Anything else? Going once. Going twice. Okay, let's go to the top tech news today. But while we get into the proper tech news, anyone have a proper tech headline that they want to make sure that we've covered today? And Ken often does. Anything today?
Tyler,
Yes?
there was an organization in the crypto space called DeFi, Kick DeFi. They're out of Singapore. I believe they're regulated through Singapore. But what's interesting is that they're on my LinkedIn, and they literally made unicorn status in 3 years, and they had no salary, no funding before they got there. And it was a really impressive story between the two co-founders for sure. It's called Cake DeFi.
Okay.
Really very interesting for sure, because they did this all just by sweat equity and sort of bootstrapping it and doing it all on their own. And they were turning away hundreds of investors. It was really powerful to read the story.
Okay.
But it was on LinkedIn, so I'll find it and I'll send it out.
Okay. Next up is the first story of today, Thursday, March 31st. We're already at the end of Q1. That was quick, wasn't it, for 2022? That went quick. We're already 3 months.
2022?
2022, sorry, yeah. Already blasted through the first 3 months of the year. The top story
Tyler,
today,
I'm sure you're preparing an April Fool's joke for us, aren't you?
I generally don't. That isn't one of my rituals.
Darn.
Because he's more Japanese. April 1st is a very serious day in Japan. They start all their new school, new work term, and new financial year.
Yeah,
Very
it's
serious.
very much the beginning of the new year for business and schools in Japan. Everyone goes back to school. And then that's shortly followed by Gogetsubiyo, which is the following month, where you're back into the routine and you have what's called May sickness in Japan.
Golden Week.
Yeah, well, it's typically very rainy, and everyone gets a little depressed now that they're back at their boring, routine. Anyway,
Yeah,
Tyler, when
after
is the cherry? Tyler, when is the cherry blossom season in
Now,
Japan?
usually the
now,
first week of April.
now it's happening. It's full bloom now. I just want to make a comment. There are many crypto projects in Singapore. We are very highly regulated. Most of the projects, I would say 90%, they do not have a license. So if you are looking into projects, please look very carefully. Go to the MAS website, because most of them have no license and they will be kicked out very soon.
Okay, so the top story is that a camera company called Wyze, spelled Wyze, had been aware of several vulnerabilities in its home security cameras for years without fixing them, despite being warned by cybersecurity outfits like Bitdefender. A WizeCam internet camera vulnerability allows unauthenticated remote access to videos and images stored on local memory cards and had remained unfixed for nearly 3 years. The next story is from Bloomberg.
Tyler, didn't we cover something similar to this with the Ring camera back in the day with Lakeisha and Michael? Didn't we also talk about
Not
vulnerabilities in
3
the Ring
years,
camera
though.
as well?
Not
Different,
3 years.
yeah.
I know it's a different brand, but I actually know of the Wyze because someone in my network uses it for their business, which is really interesting to hear you say this right now.
And they had a couple of sales at Amazon where they were running for like $15. So a lot of people snatched those thinking that it's a good deal, only to be, snooped on and seen by strangers in their bedrooms. So
Here's the easy way to think about all security cameras are vulnerable and exploitable. I've been popping security cameras in VoIP systems to get into places since 2004. Nothing has changed.
Oh, I miss Greg Duffy
yeah,
now. I think he's
Mhm.
It's early.
So Bloomberg says they have sources which say that Apple and Meta, known as Facebook, gave user data to hackers who were pretending to be police, asking for user data, essentially. They gave user data to hackers in response to forged emergency data requests. So when the police or the authorities need user data because there's a murder suspect or, make up whatever scenario you want, and the authorities now have to subpoena user data records from Apple or Facebook, they have to submit what's called an emergency data request. And apparently some hackers were able to forge these emergency data requests and able to get important user data from Apple and Facebook. Discord said it had also fulfilled a forged legal request. Apple and Meta provided customer data to hackers who masqueraded as law enforcement officials.
Do they have a legal obligation to report to those who were hacked?
Great question. Tom, do they have to notify the people who they made vulnerable?
Yeah, I would assume they did. They would have to, because I remember in 2013 this happened with Experian, and Experian literally gave up everybody with credits information. Now, the ease of social engineering as law enforcement is easy, but it's also ballsy, because you'll literally have them and the feds coming after you like they're like you wouldn't believe. So the real question is, did they modify the data, or did they do it through portals? Because most of, say, Facebook and the rest of them all have a portal where you can submit that stuff. So I'm curious about that. So hypothetical, this may not be real. Say they did nypd.org as an account, and they said, we need this for this investigation, and they submitted it that way. Was it their fault, or is it Google's fault for not having proper validation requirement? Well, not Google, Apple, or it's a curious case.
Mm-hmm. Next up is that the chairman of TSMC in Taiwan, Mark Liu, says that consumer demand for smartphones and PCs and TVs is slowing down, especially in China. I imagine in Russia as well, as the cost of components and materials rises. So as prices go up, demand goes down. Makes sense. And as we come out of COVID, I imagine demand's going down as we spend more time outside and not locked in our apartments, right?
Back in our offices.
Yeah. The next is from CNBC. It says a look at 3C, a grassroots group of SMBs, which are small and medium businesses, against big tech regulation, financed by Google and Amazon, which claim support for SMBs that haven't heard of it. The Connected Commerce Council, the CCC, which pitches itself as a grassroots movement representing small business owners. And people are naturally calling bullshit on this. They're skeptical that the legitimacy of this, that it's actually because you just have to follow the paper trail or the money trail and it benefits big tech. So no doubt this article is going to try and draw the connection that this is AstroTurf lobbying organization, as they say in this article. Lobbying watchdog group called 3C is an AstroTurf lobbying organization thanks to tech giants' financial support. So that this is basically, making puppet organizations at the behest of big tech and their deep pockets.
You mean the big techs are financing activist group to go against themselves?
No, to basically Amazon and Google are ecosystems that benefit small businesses. So does Facebook. Facebook tried to make the same point when Apple was not going to share data with Facebook. Facebook said, oh, Apple's trying to hurt small businesses who use Facebook's advertising network because they're no longer going to give you the data you need to market effectively. So, hey, small businesses, you should be very angry at Apple that Apple's no longer giving Facebook the data that you need to target your future customers. So essentially, this is a variation on that theme where big tech like Amazon and Google, who also empower small and medium businesses who use their platforms to grow their small and medium businesses, they would love to see, Amazon and Google would love to see small and medium sized businesses standing up and telling regulators, hey, why are you punishing that platform that we are dependent on to grow as small and medium businesses? We love Google. We love Amazon. They help our small and medium business grow and thrive and succeed. How dare you crack down on big tech? We need that platform to be what it is because now you're going to hurt small and because Google and Amazon cleverly know that one way to stop a regulator from regulating is to convince the regulator that their new regulation actually hurts small businesses. So that's what they're trying to do, is create an organization of potentially illegitimate, debatably legitimate small and medium businesses who are jumping up on the soapbox and telling regulators to not be so swift and hasty with their regulation of big tech because it's going to hurt small and medium businesses. And that puts a linger of doubt in the minds of regulators, and that slows down their swift regulation activities. But of course, this is just a very clever use of money. I mean, you spend a couple $1,000,000 as big tech to create a little, team like this, and you can slow down and potentially derail the regulation train. Free membership. The CCC, the Connected Commerce Council, does not charge fees to its members or bill them for services. Well, then how the hell, who's paying for it? Yeah, big tech. Google and Amazon are paying for it because that's who ultimately is benefiting from it. It's not clear whether the group has any sources of revenue beyond donations from large tech companies. And here's where, this isn't really illegal. This is just how playing the game. This is how the game is played. But it's interesting to see how the sausage gets made. So it's a quote, for the Connected Commerce Council to succeed, it needs to convince legislators that it's truly advocating on behalf of more than 10,000 small businesses it claims to represent. Yep, that's one of the quotes. However, you can start to peel back the curtain on the organization just a bit. It's clear that this image of enthusiastic antitrust opposition is being fueled by big tech cash. Yeah, no doubt that it is. I have no doubt that it is. And that's not, there's nothing directly illegal about that. I'm sure they're doing it legally. Yeah, let's see. That's how, this is politics in general. Politicians know this shit all day long. Goddamn. If that's the most Washington, D.C. tech story I've ever read. That's just how the sausage gets made on Capitol Hill. So the next one that I have here is from The Verge. It says Apple updates its App Store rules in the Netherlands to let Dutch dating apps take payments through third-party processors, but a 27% commission still applies. The goddamn you, Apple, you shady. You are so shady. So what's going on here is a Dutch court ruled that Apple has to allow dating apps the ability to charge users directly through third-party payment processors, not Apple's monopoly of using Apple's payment gateway. And the Dutch court says that, and Apple says, yeah, we'll get around to that someday. And the court says, no, you got to do that now. And Apple's like, yeah, maybe later. And the court says, well, if you keep delaying, we're going to charge you 5 million euros a week or whatever it is. And Apple says, yeah, we don't care about that. And they're like, okay, well, make it 5 million a day, whatever. They were upping the ante and escalating to make it painful for Apple. And now Apple's saying, okay, we're now going to let you use third-party payment gateways other than ours, but we're going to charge you a 27% commission. Basically, getting the same thing we got when we forced you to use ours. If you're not going to use ours, that's fine. You can use someone else's, but we're just going to charge you a 27% commission on that exchange, even though you didn't use our service to handle the processing of the payments. We deserve a commission because it happened in our app store. The court's going to say, hell nah, as soon as the court hears about this, and they just heard about it, just like you and I just did, probably in the past hour. And the court is then going to say, hey, Apple, that isn't kosher with our interpretation of, what we're trying to do here. You're being sneaky bastards. And you can't force a commission into this process either. Sorry, we didn't think to preemptively state that up front, you sneaky, greedy bastards. So if we had known that you were going to attempt to do something so incredibly shady, we, of course, would have mentioned that you can't do that. But now that you've done it, we're now going to let you know that you can't do that. So the next story is from The Verge that Google announces some quote-unquote highly cited labels for search results available soon in the US on mobile and in coming weeks globally. A new notices will help searchers, that's you and me, check the validity of information. Google's adding a new highly cited label for some search results. So, for example, when you're doing a Google search for, underwater ping pong or whatever your thing is, yeah, if there is a highly cited source, they're going to tag that and make it much more visible that source is probably the one you're going to want to click on because it's we're going to tag it as being highly cited as a label, so you can you'll know which is a good source. Pardon me for 2 seconds. Yes. Okay. Okay. So the next one is that Google plans to use its machine learning models to improve search results for users in crisis. We covered that yesterday. Bloomberg says that blockchain.com raises funding at a $14 billion valuation, more than double from a year ago, March 2021. So that's a quick $7 billion right there. At a time when for the past 4 months, tech valuations have dropped significantly. So that's quite an achievement. The next is from Mark Gurman from Bloomberg, who says he has sources. This is Bloomberg's resident tech geek. His sources say that Apple is planning to expand its financial services by adding payment processing, lending risk assessments, credit checks, fraud analysis, and more. Oh, they're becoming a bank, y'all. Here comes Apple Bank. They're now dipping their toes very deeply into the products and services and offerings of traditional banks. The effort is being dubbed Breakout, would replace fintech partners that Apple's built their ecosystem around. Apple eyes payment processing, credit checks, and other tasks. Apple's developing its own payment processing technology infrastructure for future financial products, part of an ambitious effort that would reduce its reliance on outside partners over time. According to people with knowledge of the matter, a multi-year plan would bring a wide range of financial tasks in-house. Said people who asked not to be identified because of the plans aren't public. That includes, here we go, payment processing, risk assessment for lending. That's kind of buy now, pay later falls under that as well. Fraud analysis, that too. Credit checks, and additional customer service functions such as handling of disputes. Again, those are all the bread and butter of the credit card industry. All of those things I just mentioned are Visa and MasterCard and their bread and butter. So we are now potentially going to see Apple make a legitimate competitor to Visa and MasterCard or American Express, Union Pay, what have you.
So Tyler, you're correct that that's the business of the credit card companies. I just want to distinguish that doesn't make them a bank. A bank is very separate. They'd have
Yeah.
to be taken deposits. They'd be subject to the Bank Holding Company Act. I doubt they want to be subject to the Bank Holding Company Act. So I think they're going to avoid actually being a bank. They're not going to be borrowing money at the Fed window or anything.
Right. The effort is. Well, by the way, I don't with their massive cash reserves. I don't know that they would need to borrow much from the
That's
public.
what I know. I'm saying they may have to. The Fed might need money from them. Yeah, I know.
The
Tyler,
effort, yes.
do you think this could be in tie with the stuff they already do with like Goldman Sachs as far as the lending to buy a brand new iBook and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think the next paragraph gets into that. It says the effort is focused on future products rather than Apple's current lineup of services. So this is new shit, basically. Still, the news sent shares of Core Card Corporation and Green Dot Corp, two of Apple's existing partners, down more than 10% apiece, because that's who was enabling the Apple Pay transactions previously. Goldman Sachs, another key partner, slipped as much as 1.2%. So they might not be as dependent on Goldman Sachs and Green Dot. The push would turn the company, Apple, into a bigger force in financial services, building on a lineup that already includes an Apple-branded credit card, peer-to-peer payments, the Wallet app, and a mechanism for merchants to accept credit cards from an iPhone. Oh, we read that headline about 3 weeks ago, didn't we? That Apple's working on a way, like a competitor to Square, that would allow any two users to instantly zap money to each other. Even it would allow anyone to function as a merchant, essentially, a merchant account, as it's traditionally called. Anyone who ever was signed up to accept credit cards, you need to get what's called a merchant account usually from a bank to allow you to accept credit cards. And that's essentially what they're going to do here. Anyone will be able to accept credit cards via Apple, formerly known as a merchant account. And that's wild. Square does that as well through an app, but this would be baked into the device.
I think the important point there is that Apple, just in the short term, they want to control the refresh cycle and not be reliant on the carriers, right? Because the carriers have the licensed spectrum, but their future rests in Bluetooth and unlicensed spectrum devices, applications. So I think one aspect of this strategy and approach is they're trying to take some of the control, make money on the float, obviously, but also be in far more control of the refresh cycles versus the consumer and the carriers.
That perfectly ties to the article we read, 48 hours ago, that Apple wants to get into subscription devices, where you pay a monthly subscription fee for your devices.
Exactly.
And this would help bridge all of that very nicely. Apple's also working on its own subscription service for hardware and a buy now, pay later feature for Apple Pay transactions, Bloomberg has reported. And indeed, imagine Apple tells every physical and e-commerce merchant on the planet, anyone selling anything, hey, why don't you accept Apple Pay? And if you do, we will process the quality of the customer and build in a automatic buy now, pay later for them. And this will increase your transactions significantly because people don't have to pay for everything up front. We're essentially acting as an issuer of credit, for lack of a better word, like Klarna does, by the way. But boy, oh boy, Apple could scale this out through merchants in a very big way, very, very quickly. Because unlike the difficulty that any company that wanted to compete with Visa and MasterCard has is scale. Apple can say, oh, the card already exists in your device. It's right there. We're already at scale. And by the way, your Visa and MasterCard aren't offering you a buy now, pay later. And hey, merchants, be sure to remind everybody that if they pay with their Apple Card, they can instantly qualify for buy now, pay later pretty sweet deal all around. The merchant benefits because they get more people buying, because less abandonment, because they're deferring the cost till later, essentially. And that this is a potentially big win. Now, the question is, what percentage will Apple take in all of this? If you go to a restaurant and you pay with Apple and you do a buy now, pay later on your meal that you just ate, and you build. By the way, how does Apple Maps play into that? For example, you could imagine we already know what the App Store looks like, and the people in the App Store are mainly they're in the App Store. They compete with all the other apps, and there's an in-app purchase, and it's all very seamless and easy. Whatever. Okay, that's nice. Imagine that they do that to the physical world. So you're on Apple Maps. It's like an app store. You see a restaurant, you go to that restaurant, you walk in. The cashier, the merchant knows what you're buying. They create a bill for you, and you agree in one click, right? And you pay the bill in one click. They submit the bill to you on your device. You accept, maybe with deferred payments and a buy now, pay later for payments over 4 months or what have you, and you walk out. Now, what I want to know, and maybe Ken knows, is, I believe that Apple will have access to all of that sweet, juicy data, because friends of mine were building a company nearly identical to this in 2013 in Stockholm called WRAP, WRAPP. And it was a card, and it was essentially all of this. Anyway, I believe Apple is going to be able to monetize all of your data, and I believe they're going to be able to partner with every, taco stand you've ever been to, and they're going to make it super, super crazy simple for everyone to receive and send payments like a credit card transaction instantly on their devices, whether you're, an ice cream shop or what have you, or your cleaning lady who comes to clean your house will be able to receive the payments through this Apple Card system. Very interesting. The Apple Card currently uses Core Card for its processor. Apple shares briefly gained on the news. Apple, financial services help keep users glued to their iPhones and generate revenue from interest and transaction fees. That's why the company wants greater control over the process, letting it roll out new options more quickly and potentially collect more revenue. It may also help Apple expand future services to additional countries. Though Apple Pay is available in more than 70 countries, services such as peer-to-peer payments, the Apple Card and Apple Cash Card, remain US only. Last week, Apple acquired a startup called Credit Kudos, which uses bank data to make lending decisions. Yeah, so they need that. They need all of that access to that bank data to make the lending decisions, because they want to be a buy now, pay later for every store on the planet. Huge move. The first product that will rely on the new system is expected to be the upcoming buy now, pay later service. That feature, called Apple Pay Later internally, will have two parts. Apple Pay in 4 for short-term or installment payment plans without interest, and also Apple Pay monthly installments for long-term payment plans with interest, like monthly subscriptions with interest. Apple is discussing using the in-house technology for the 4 installment plan. Apple would continue to work with Goldman Sachs on the larger term installment offering with interest, which will also have a higher maximum lending amount. The company is considering, it's more like a traditional credit card, basically, letting it offer competing plans with different interest rates and payoff deadlines. Moving to in-house payment processor would be a significant undertaking for Apple, and while development has advanced, the company has faced some hurdles and could ultimately delay its plans, or, in a very unlikely scenario, choose to remain with partners. Now, they're going to go through with this. It's worth the effort for sure. Anyone with a take on Apple going big into credit cards and buy now, pay later?
My spontaneous reaction is that we should ping in Sebastian from Klarna and hear his
Yeah.
reflections.
Yeah. Yeah. So Johan's referring to Sebastian is the CEO and one of the co-founders of the world's biggest and the pioneer of the buy now, pay later system that has now been copied internationally. And he must have known this was coming for quite some time.
I have a half a take, right? And it's to do with how many systems Apple is on, right? So, and I can only really liken this to how AWS is almost so ubiquitous, right? The same way with Apple and how many, it's not really a user, it's how many devices there are active within the world. So, it would be adding people to a new ecosystem with the least amount of friction possible. That being said, I wonder what the competition would be. Are they competing with banks, or are they competing with buy now pay laters, or are they competing with other devices? Because there seems to be almost no competition within the Apple sector, considering how many devices they have active within the world right now.
I think they're competing with credit cards and buy now, pay laters most directly. I think Ken's
But they're
right.
also competing with people that make phones and electronic goods, and competing with uh, people that make apps and all of these other sectors. And obviously the financial sector is one of the biggest sectors, so it's like a task in and around itself. But with the innovation of buy now pay later, it creates a new scheme that they're able to create the most least friction between small businesses and people who want to buy. So anyone with an Apple device, and like the Apple device just seems like it's going to be more powerful than whatever we imagined prior, because it's all it just seems like there is a exponent component to this in how much power the next device is going to have technically.
Okay.
Next thing is that Apple will make it harder to get new buy now, pay later applications to be available by the store, and
Uh-huh.
limiting the amount of NFC and contactless things that you can do with your phone with other exclamation mark unsecure platforms that has not been accredited. This will be a can of worms.
Yeah, it gets into antitrust stuff, kind of. So the next story is that Google begins trialing its updated privacy sandbox tools globally, including topics and Fledge APIs, starting with developers, followed by Chrome beta users. Google has just announced the next stage of trials of its privacy sandbox proposal. Its new data scheme to kind of maximize their own efforts and all of your data and minimize how much they are forced to share with everybody else by regulators. It's a funny tightrope they're walking there. Um, the next is about the Axie Infinity hack. Sky Maven, who's the company that's kind of largely responsible, is taking 6 days to disclose that it is irresponsible and people likely lost money needed to live, not just spare cash. Well, that's kind of on them if they're using money they need to live to buy virtual objects. I don't know that anyone has ever suggested that anyone ever do that. Um, yeah, that's very
Oh, I'm
unfortunate.
sure plenty of people have suggested that, Tyler, just not with any scruples in place.
Right. Intel acquires a company called Granulate, which develops tools to optimize computer infrastructure with AIs. Bloomberg says they have sources that Apple is seeking to diversify memory chip suppliers. Yeah, no shit. Potentially using a Chinese company called Yangtze after Japanese supplier lost a batch to contamination. And the New York Times is doing a profile piece on Ben McKenzie, star of the OC, who has become a prominent crypto critic and is writing a book with journalist Jacob Silverman. Vox says they've done some analysis that the majority of the most viewed reels on Facebook's platforms are anonymous or reposted. Facebook says Reels is Instagram's biggest engagement growth contributor. Facebook's pivot back to video shows how badly it needs young people. Financial Times says they have sources that Masayoshi-san of SoftBank tells SoftBank leadership that the company needs to slow investments amid the Ukraine war, falling tech stocks, and China's crackdown. Yeah, you've got the sky falling in multiple directions. And so Masayoshi-san is telling his investors to chill out a little bit. Makes sense? The next is a company called Chief, a social network with 12,000 users that helps business women rise into positions of power, raises $100 million, led by Capital G, which is Google's investment team. And what else? Oh, CNN has an interview with the Ukrainian IT researcher who released the chat logs from the Russian ransomware gang, which was one of the big stories yesterday, that a Ukrainian who was somehow infiltrated the Russian ransomware gang and leaked the chat logs. Now CNN is doing an interview with that person. And in the interview, he says, "I can fight with a keyboard." How one Ukrainian IT specialist exposed a notorious Russian ransomware gang. 4 days into the Russian invasion, the researcher began publishing the biggest leak ever of files and data from a syndicate of Russian and Eastern European criminals wanted by the FBI for conducting attacks on hundreds of U.S. organizations and causing millions of dollars in losses. The thousands of internal documents and communications include evidence that appears to suggest Conti, the hacker collective, operatives have contacts within the Russian government, including the intelligence service, FSB. That supports a long-standing U.S. allegation that Moscow has colluded with cyber criminals for a strategic advantage. Yeah, but we already knew that. The tech newsers knew that. Maybe the rest of the world hasn't figured that out yet. But we were connecting those dots very long ago. In fact, we even knew that they would disappear and reappear outside of Russian borders, which they did. That was the obvious implicit admission when the hackers were doing what we knew they would do, based on the conversation Biden had with Putin in Geneva. Anyway, so the interesting interview with the Ukrainian cyber researcher there. Wall Street Journal says that research shows that TikTok tick videos contribute to a rise in cases of girls with tics. We've read that story before. U.S. emergency room visits among teen girls with tics has tripled during the pandemic. Tourette's videos posted on the platform continue to draw many viewers, and doctors say teen girls keep showing up at their offices with functional neurological issues. Okay, now, this is interesting for a whole other reason. Because yesterday there was an article by what's her name? The lady who used to do social media for New York Times, Taylor Lorenz, who revealed that Facebook had hired a kind of a PR agency out of Arlington, Virginia, to do its bidding in notifying policymakers about the evil doings of TikTok. Okay, why not do that? Why not do that when you are being hit over the head endlessly by mainstream media, corporate media, and you know that someone else is far more deserving of those head hittings? Why not notify find a way to notify the people hitting your head that somebody else is far more deserving of having their heads hit. So here's why I raised this issue. Because one of the strong conjectures of Taylor's piece is that this was based on a thin air. That in fact the students were not doing these slapping their teachers, and students were not destroying school bathrooms. That was the implication. When in reality, those things were happening. Teachers were being slapped. School bathrooms were being destroyed. We saw all the evidence of it. Lots of kids got expelled. Lots of principals went to local media outlets to plead to parents to knock that shit off and warn them that their students would be expelled. That's how we know that shit actually happened and that it wasn't just Facebook trying to create phantom boogeymen for their rival TikTok, as Taylor's piece implies. Now, today's story from the Wall Street Journal is that teen girls are ending up in emergency rooms. Okay, now are we to assume now that Facebook is whispering in the ear of the Wall Street Journal about this story? Maybe so, because we read this article 4, 5, 6 months ago that the young girls who were watching these tick videos were themselves starting to develop Tourette's syndrome-like tics. We already knew this. This is old news. So why is this back in the news? And indeed, the person writing this article, Julie Jargon, says, last fall, I reported on a phenomena that doctors around the globe were just beginning to understand. Teen girls were showing up in hospitals and clinics with sudden motor and verbal tics seemingly related to videos they watched on TikTok. Okay, well, are we to believe then that young people are being influenced by what's happening on TikTok or not? Because yesterday, the implication was they're not. That this is Facebook creating smokescreens to befuddle and confuse politicians into thinking that TikTok is bad. Well, here we have strong evidence to the contrary, that emergency rooms actually have young ladies showing up. Not only are they being influenced, they literally have physiological motor changes in the forms of physical tics. If that isn't evidence that TikTok is having an impact on young folks, I don't know what is. The doctors say they have functional neurological disorders, a class of afflictions that increases certain vocal tics and abnormal body movements that aren't tied to an underlying disease, unless that disease is TikTok. And oh boy, the name TikTok just all of a sudden made perfect sense. What a perfectly named app. An app that's causing tics in young girls. TikTok.
Hey,
Go
Tyler's Ken. I got a question. Maybe
ahead.
John Madden, John can, I see John on stage. I never knew that Tourette syndrome could be caused by something external like that. I mean, when I was,
It's not.
young, I mean, we
It's
had
not.
what?
They're being very careful to clarify. It says what doctors diagnosed in these girls wasn't actually Tourette syndrome. Instead, they are functional neurological disorders, a class of afflictions, blah, blah, blah. So it's a different class of disorder from traditional Tourette's.
Yeah, it doesn't reduce the fascinating implication that social input can rewire our brain in ways that create tics that resemble Tourette's, but our brains are constantly being rewired by social stimuli. So this is just kind of a very laser focused example of how that can be achieved.
But I love how now, 24 hours later, we are expected to believe that young people are very much being affected by TikTok and it's having a very real impact on their mental states in a very negative way. Is Facebook behind this? Is this total bullshit? And Facebook is just is this part of the article from yesterday that Facebook's PR team agency in Arlington, Virginia, upstairs from the Starbucks, is actually the one that this is totally bullshit, that this didn't actually happen at all, and this is purely the doings of a sinister genius PR agency whispering in the ears of the Wall Street Journal. No, it's actual emergency room visits, just like the school challenges, just like the real students who really got expelled. So how do you, I'm talking to you, Taylor, write an article about that you feel is investigative journalism without ever quoting a teacher, when the whole premise of these challenges primarily were happening on schools, and you don't bother as an investigative journalist to quote a single teacher in your piece? Because if you had, I can assure you, you would have dispelled the entire premise of your conjecture in that piece. Because we've had teachers on stage here, and 100% of them have said, oh yeah, TikTok is the biggest problem in education today, period. The biggest problem. Had you spoken to a single teacher, you would have found out that this shit is happening. Bathrooms were destroyed. There's plenty of evidence of it. Teachers were slapped. There's lawsuits about it, and dozens of kids expelled about it. So to insinuate that this was purely the phantom boogeyman of Facebook's PR agency is not good on you that you found the name of the agency that they're using. Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. You found out that how Facebook is influencing policymakers by hiring an agency. Wow, what I mean, we're stunned, we're shocked. But to insinuate that it wasn't based on some reality when it was, why? I don't know that you're doing yourself a disservice in the legitimacy defense. We already have this fake news issue that we have to deal with, and it doesn't help when you feed into the fake news narratives. I prefer that journalists try to avoid falling victim to that trap. So, here we are. TikTok. A neurologist at Cincinnati's Children's Hospital Medical Center said one child out of 8 who came to the hospital's movement disorders clinic last year had functional tics, up from fewer than 1 in 50 just 2 years ago. So it's gone from less than 1 in 50 to 1 in 8. Most of his patients were girls, and less than half have fully recovered after treatment, thank God, which in some cases included cognitive behavioral therapy, B.F. Skinner, if anyone has a minor in psychology, out of Harvard there, and staying off TikTok. Oh, wow, so the solution is staying off TikTok. Some patients whose tics improved or disappeared have developed eating disorders, tremors, or non-epileptic seizures. Oh, right, but it's Facebook who's actually hurting the kids, right? Right. Okay, so back to the tech articles. Did anybody see one that they wanted to go over that we didn't go over already?
So Tyler,
Yeah.
there's a new exploit that came out called Spring for Shell, which could be the same or worse than Log for Shell. If you remember the Log4j, Log for Shell stuff.
Huge. Yeah, that was like covers 25% of the fucking internet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now we have one that covers it. It could end up being worse. And the irony of it was also leaked by someone in China, and then after they posted it, it disappeared. And yeah, people have been a lot more frantic to having the detection for this stuff. I can honestly say the detection and validation of it's vulnerable, the fixes were out within a day. So this one's going to be interesting to see what happens, because they've already found it to be exploited in the wild coming from a bunch of Chinese IP addresses.
Ouch. Can you send the
I
link?
tweeted it to you if you wanted to post it.
Okay. Okay. I'm looking at tweets from how many minutes ago was that?
No, that was like it was closer to about 10 o'clock.
Oh, okay, we'll get to that. So we got to go through all of the tweets. Before we do, I've just found a whole bunch of breaking Ukraine-related stories. For example, um, Russia drafts an additional 134,000 conscripts, but says they won't go to Ukraine. Sure, okay. And Ukraine food supplies were deliberately destroyed by Russia in a warehouse attack. 50,000 tons of food destroyed. And an anonymous Twitter account built 60,000 followers by translating Chinese propaganda about Ukraine war and is setting off an international firestorm, according to Business Insider. And French intelligence chief has been fired after failing to predict Russia's war in Ukraine, because they should have known, as the U.S. intelligence did, and tried to warn everybody. And okay, we'll leave it there for tomorrow. Okay, so now the tweets. Thomas Tong found an interesting one that I also saw earlier today that I'm retweeting now about Mojo Vision, which I just retweeted, which is a micro LED contact lens. And they today said that they had made some major advancements. California-based Mojo Vision is developing smart contact lenses which deliver the smallest and densest of micro LED displays. The whole premise here is that it's a suitable replacement for AR glasses, ostensibly. Saratoga, California-based Mojo Vision has made rapid advances in its bid to make smart contact lenses. The most recent iteration of their lens under development features eye tracking technology as well as in-eye display capabilities. And how far away are we from wearing contact AR lenses? And who owns the trademark for iLens? Like Apple letter I lens would be a very valuable trademark at this point.
I just wonder if the pathway through contact lenses is going to make it simpler to get people to wear VR glasses when they're truly reduced to the size and configuration of traditional glasses, so that people don't feel obliged to put foreign bodies in their eyes every day just to catch up with the capability of those who have AR in their contact lenses.
So Mojo's they're on their own website. It says their industry first innovations and technologies include the smallest and densest display, 14,000 pixels per inch micro LED display in a contact lens, low latency communication. Mojo Vision has designed an ASIC processor for Mojo Lens, which incorporates a 5 gigahertz radio, so you get high bandwidth, faster than Bluetooth LE, which, yeah, you would need for video like that. Ultra precise eye tracking, medical grade power system, eye controlled user experience, and on and on and on. It's holy cow. If all of this is legitimate, you have to imagine there's a bidding war underway between Google and Apple and Amazon to buy this company.
Does anybody else besides me think it's crazy to wear a contact lens just for that purpose if it doesn't otherwise correct your vision? If you don't need a contact lens, why wear a contact lens? Because you can get an eye infection from a contact lens, particularly if people who don't clean them correctly or whatever. I used to wear contact lenses. I mean, it's I just don't see wearing contact lenses to get VR. I think that's
Well,
my opinion.
and that's exactly what I was saying, is that people who have to wear or choose to wear contact lenses for visual correction can get the AR as a bonus for their visual correction. But once everyone, all of their friends realize how much more they're experiencing the world with AR, then they'll be inclined to buy the glasses. Because I would not want to wear a contact lens for that. I agree with you completely, but it would likely uh, move sooner a time at which I'd be willing to wear glasses for that purpose.
There's so many complications that come with contact lenses as someone that wears them as well. It's like, and even with just possibly how thick these would be, and I'm not talking about on the level of what you would think of a glass, but contact lens thickness and hardness depends on basically your eye variation and how your eye makeup is, and being able to understand what the actual shape of your eye is. There's a lot of eye health that goes into this and optometry, but I feel like the company in and around itself having this technology is more so being able to have the size of the screens and the size of the displays, right? So if you can put it in a contact lens, then you can definitely put it in a normal lens, right? So I feel like that's where it comes to, is the square area or the pixel area you're able to operate within, right? So that is more the innovation than anything else. But to put something in your actual eye and then you actually have to blink with it inside of your eye for 300 times a day or so, it doesn't seem like the best operation to have within your eyes, honestly.
We just talked about ticks resulting from a smartphone display. So let's think about that directly on the eye.
This is Valerie. Just as a long-time contact wearer, there's all kinds of things with this. These may be more of a gas permeable type of lens than necessarily a soft lens. Who knows? But who knows where we'll be in 5 years? I do believe contact lenses overall for obviously eye for vision is very safe. So it just all depends. But there was always going to be people on the edge looking to do something unique. People have been using contact lenses just to even change the color of their eyes. So we'll just have to see.
That's actually huge in Thailand, by the way. People using colored contact lenses for
And
treatment.
accidentally, oh no, I mean incidentally, lately the Batman movie actually he uses this technology as a you can say it's a spy tech. So that's another direction to think of it.
Oh, so using your contact lenses as LED displays to constantly change your eye color. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
if you see the Batman movie, you know how far this could go. Yeah, it record everything and recognize the with the facial recognition, so it can detect the ID from your.
Yeah, I was talking about the TikTokers and how much they love LED displays in their room. So having it in your eyes and you can have red color eyes one time and be like Teen Wolf, or have like pink color eyes and all of these other things. It'd be funny to see, honestly.
Okay, are you ready for the next one? Here we go. Um, the Yesterday we were talking about, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, about video search, audio search, podcasting searches. That there was a very cool app called Fathom that you could search the text of podcasts and it would recommend a segment within a podcast, a clip that you could listen to, where basically somebody had done the heavy lifting of transcribing and converting the audio into text and then indexing all of that text so that it can be searched, right?
Yeah,
Well,
Yes, you did.
yeah, and I mentioned how Spotify has an ad network, and this could get very interesting very soon. And did I not say that we will then see YouTube boosting their
Yep.
music and podcasting offerings to stay ahead in that space? Did I say that?
Yes, you did.
I did say that, right?
Now we have the news.
And now the headline today is exclusive that YouTube's plans for podcasting. YouTube is planning tighter integration, monetization, and analytics for podcasts. Despite no announcement from YouTube's director of podcasting, Kai Chuk, at Podcast Movement Evolutions last week, Pod News has been sent a 84-page presentation produced by YouTube intended for podcast publishers. In it, 3 slides marked as looking ahead allow us a view into what YouTube is planning. YouTube is looking to at ingesting podcast RSS feeds directly, which I'll explain why that's very important in a second. Which the slides suggest with the new podcast homepage to be at youtube.com/podcasts. The URL doesn't work yet. Podcasts appear to be promoted with familiar square artwork thumbnails, which is the standard, which is part of the RSS embed that people syndicate through RSS. I'll explain the details of that in a second. And I'm looking at the photos of this deck, of these slides that YouTube is clearly sharing with its partners about the future of podcasting on YouTube. And it includes, not surprisingly, audio ads. Growth of Google sold audio ads, allowing advertisers to tap into audiences who are listening to music, podcasts, and other audio content on YouTube. That's a straight shot at Spotify, because that's what Spotify does. They are an audio ad network, embedding audio ads inside of audio that you're listening to. And now YouTube's going to do the same. And YouTube has to go into podcasts because it's the future of search. And by the way, that is of incredible importance for an app you might have heard of called Clubhousey. Because Clubhousey is the future of content creation. Social audio and podcasts both are the new, better alternative to writing blog posts. And we create thousands of pages of blog posts worth of content every week, which is indexable and soon to be searchable.
Tyler,
Yes, John.
it introduced the law of unintended consequences is at work here. What it's going to do is all of us are going to have to learn how to never say anything that was contextualized by something we said 30 seconds, 3 minutes, half an hour earlier, because that context will be stripped systematically.
And John,
as
whatever you did to that starving child, we're going to leave that behind and just move forward.
I was there a background noise? I didn't hear it.
No, I said
It was
whatever.
called laughter.
Whatever you
Oh,
did to that poor starving child, we're going to forgive you and move on.
Yeah, okay. And questions like, John, have you stopped beating your wife yet? How do you answer
Right.
that one?
Yes. So,
Crazy.
yeah, the other
Tyler.
slide. Hold, 1 second there, Jorge or Tom. It says they're going to do audio ads, obviously, but that's what really takes this thing to the stratosphere. And that's how you incentivize everyone to participate, because now they can monetize all of their podcasts, which they previously weren't able to do on Apple or whatever, Google Podcasts or whatever they were using. You need an audio ad network. Spotify is currently the only one who has that at any sort of scale. YouTube could certainly whip that up rather expeditiously, and that would be all it takes. And by the way, let me go into the RSS thing for a second. Really simple syndication created by Dave Weiner, who came up with a very simple protocol for publishing podcasts and even blog posts through RSS. And browsers used to have RSS readers that would allow you to subscribe to RSS channels, essentially, and suck in the content. That's how the web used to work, by the way, how blog posts used to work. So people wouldn't have to keep coming back to your blog or your website. They would have their own reader that subscribes to your content, your RSS feed, and they would suck in your RSS feed. They would subscribe to your RSS feed, and then your content would magically appear in their RSS feed reader.
Isn't that what Blogger did? And Google owns Blogger, or was it WordPress? I forget.
Blogger was a platform for a very simple way to make an RSS compatible content stream or channel that people could subscribe to.
What was the name of that search engine you mentioned earlier for podcasts?
Fathom, Fathom.
Thank you.
It's an app. It's a mobile app. Anyway, so the next slide in YouTube's deck that they're circulating in addition to the audio ads, and of course, revenue to be shared with the podcast publishers. So now all you would have to do for YouTube to suck in your entire history of podcasts as a podcaster is tell it your RSS URL. And then it would suck that shit in and slurp it all up and get your whole. And by the way, that's how podcasts work in general still today. Apple wants to know your RSS feed URL. You give it to Apple, then Apple's app sucks in all of your podcasts. Same with Google Podcasts. Same with Spotify, by the way. So now YouTube's going to ask for your RSS URL, suck in all of your podcasts with your thumbnails for each of your podcasts, and it will magically appear in YouTube. And YouTube's going to need a separate little, youtube.com/podcast or podcast.youtube.com. YouTube will also supply analytics. Now that's where it gets interesting, because podcasters generally have shit for analytics from the traditional players like Apple and
or Spotify at all.
Google.
Not
Well, Spotify's are not that
Spot.
bad, honestly.
Well, if you use Anchor via
If you
Spotify, it's
exactly,
better. Yeah.
exactly. Spotify bought a startup called Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you from scratch to create your RSS channel very simply. You just upload an image, you name the podcast, it creates the RSS feed and submits the RSS feed to all of the popular podcasting channels like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, etc. All of them magically. It sends your URL to all of them magically, which it honestly is a pain in the ass. That actually takes time to do. They don't
Yeah,
make it easy.
it,
So,
it's very hard. Yeah.
right. And you'd have to create it separately on each channel and upload the images separately on every channel and go through the whole naming process on every channel and all that bullshit. It's a real pain in the ass.
Can we just like pause and expand on this point, please? Because I think it's important to know like there's a difference between professional podcasters and like content creators that have podcasts. Because people just like create podcasts, upload to YouTube, and use Anchor, not knowing what the value of their streams are actually worth, and they use the particular analytics from Anchor. But then you have embed ads and mid-roll, right, which is what Spotify has as well, where they just throw ads all over your podcast, and you don't know how much you're actually generating. And this has been something in the podcast world, which is how much an actual stream is worth. I don't know whether you want to go into that, but the value of streams is actually important, and no one actually knows. However, YouTube obviously has a good barometer for the type of analytics you get, as well as being able to pay people out properly. But you really get pennies in Anchor versus how much you get on YouTube for a video, right? But there's three different types of content there, which is your audio is content and your video is content. Those are two. Now, if you understand just broadcasting in general, you understand that your video is totally different type of content to your audio, and if you're live streaming, that's also a different type of content. So you're streaming, you're basically broadcasting without knowing how much value you're actually providing to each of these particular platforms.
Yeah, that's my favorite part of Anchor. Is with Anchor you upload your audio file and then type in whatever text goes along with it. It syndicates that out to all the different podcasting platforms magically, and more importantly, keeps track of all the analytics of the consumption geographically, demographically, on all in an aggregated way of all of the podcasting platforms. So you can see which podcasting platform your listeners are using, in what part of the world, and which demographics, and all of that beautiful and analytics all baked in for free. It's beautiful. It's really amazing. And Google's going to have to compete with that because Spotify is picking up market share very nicely. And in the future, that's going to be a big problem because Spotify is setting itself up to be an audio search engine. Okay.
Imagine being able to play a podcast on YouTube and actually being allowed to close the app. That'd be crazy for YouTube, I think.
Currently, yeah, Spotify does offer that now, even for free users. YouTube offers listening in the background if you pay a couple dollars a month for their YouTube audio or whatever it's called, YouTube Red or something. Anyway,
Yes.
the reason this is so important is because we're now connecting the pipes that are going to enable the future of search in the form of audio. It's finally here. It's all going to be monetizable. And basically, the whole revolution that happened in the 80s that allowed text on web pages to become searchable and findable and get traffic and put ads and make businesses, that's all coming to audio right now. And social audio is going to benefit greatly from that because the distinction between a podcast and a social audio room is barely worth mentioning. They are essentially the same.
Well, actually, I would bet not too much to throw away, but there is a small distinction, which is how many people you can get to activate at a specific time, which is actually valuable as a broadcaster. You need to
Well,
know how many
it
people you can get
just,
in a place and time. So yeah,
social audio, just you mean in terms of speakers?
not just speakers, like people in the room, like 1,000 people in a room every day for
Yeah,
over 500 days. That's a lot to people who
right.
understand what that means, right? Like radio.
My
But
point,
podcast is
I,
a
I would
legacy, basically.
I would say they are in fact the same. Social audio, it happens to make it easier to get more participants in your podcast.
Yeah, 100%. On that level, yeah. I'm just talking about what the value of that is, right? Like, just as you can get particular people to a conference at any one time, there is just that much of it's like a called consumer activation or
Oh,
um
you just stumbled on something very important, my friend.
yeah.
Because
Tyler,
hold
is it
on,
going to be like pay per click?
Cheryl, please hold on a second. Damolaire just really
Mm.
stumbled on a very brilliant point, which is once YouTube enables audio uploads that you can make money for, because people are tripping all over themselves to create YouTube videos that they can monetize. And they're willing to pull pranks on people and injure themselves and slap people and do all kinds of crazy antics to get views on their ads and clicks to monetize their content. The same dynamic is going to happen in audio. Now, what's beautiful is in video, you need cameras and lights and a lot of bullshit. In audio, you don't. You need a microphone.
Just a good microphone, $100 will get you a great microphone for this.
But here's my point: is every important talk you ever attended, every public talk you ever attended, every city council meeting, every parent-teacher night, every concert you ever went to, every band rehearsal that ever happened. I mean, just countless amount of content can now be captured and uploaded and monetized and searched.
Oh, you're actually talking to real. I was even thinking just on the advertising side, but that side as well is like that's a real exponent for just localized voice and audio, and especially when you're able to search it, so you can look up New York City Council meeting for whatever bill that you want, and then it can actually come up, and there's no need for you to see what the actual location is, but to hear the voices and how it's indexed, you'll be able to read who is speaking at any one time. So that'd be quality craftsmanship from YouTube or Spotify, whoever does it first. I think Twitter does a good job of it. However, they do a terrible job everywhere else. But the other part I wanted to add, which is how YouTube lives go, which is you're able to donate while being live, and that adds to the creator economy as well, which is I thought an important point to point out as well, because people actually
Right.
pay for you to be live on YouTube as well.
Right. Well, here's where I'm getting to the next big point here, which is once YouTube enables podcasts, YouTube already has live streaming in video. Do you realize how fundamentally easier live audio is compared to live video? It's way, 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 way easier.
So Tyler,
Hold that thought. Let me get the cherry out to throw on top of the sundae I'm making right here. The cherry is once YouTube starts having live streaming audio that you can search, they'll have canonical audio in the form of podcasts. Podcasts implies it's pre-recorded. Social audio kind of implies that it's live. We're going to need more clarity on the terminology going forward. But you will have canonical audio. We already have canonical video. We do have live video. We call that live streaming. We're going to have live audio also. So when that happens, and when you do searches in YouTube, which by the way is owned by Google, so ostensibly doing searches in Google, will present you with live videos, pre-recorded videos, pre-recorded audio in the form of podcast, and live audio that is content that is relevant to your searches. Why is that interesting? Because now can you see how Google could be incredibly interested in a live audio, social audio platform? Something
Yes, yeah.
like,
If you
and
need
that
an example,
platform,
yeah.
you might think of it as like a house full of clubs, like a.
That's-
Tyler, I'm going to put my security hat on this one.
Go ahead.
All right. So, you know all the work that has to go into a podcast. This is going to take deep fakes to a whole new level. Okay, because now you're going to have that. You'll have it translated from voice to text. It'll be completely searchable. And it's also probably going to open up a whole new line of work for people to investigate what are really deep fakes or not. Because there's very few people out there that are doing it. So once this goes mainstream, it's going to be harder to tell what's what's real, what's not, and what's the truth.
Which, by the way, I'm happy to announce that we're going to have Will Smith coming on later today
You're
to talk
supposed to
about
save that
why
tomorrow.
he slapped Chris Rock.
like
Chris
I I wanted to see like talk about this that distinguishing that route, because Tom brings up like an awesome point, which is just how ubiquitous it is, and whether how the social climate will shift depending on, you know, the adoption rate of this. Obviously it's going to be high for people who like to do long form content as a creator. However, there is that other area, which is the social audio aspect, which is like what we love here, right? Where you're allowed to be on YouTube, and then you can have little small content enclaves. And then I don't know whether those will be considered silos in a way, because if someone that stumbles upon it, like, is there a nuance that we're going to be engaging in with all of these other things? Like, because we don't necessarily engage in nuance today. And if we're coming into little small enclaves that are partly partly siloed, then how are we going to distinguish between just people that are making content and people that are, you know, trying to have fun online or something like that?
I know my first
I don't think it'll
fire
much
sale.
matter, but I think that the Reddit the phenomena of people, um, if by the way, one of the big frictions of social audio at the moment is it's downloading a new app in the form of Clubhouse. Twitter has ostensibly removed much of that friction. You know, people can participate in Twitter Spaces, and now you understand why Twitter is so interested in that, in some part because that the ability to search those conversations. Oh, by the way, Twitter just enabled searching of your historical DMs. Perhaps not a coincidence, because now no doubt they keep your recordings of your Twitter Spaces rooms, which are already by default converted into text, and obviously will be searchable as well. So you're starting to see this beginnings of the audio web, which was previously almost exclusively text, is now becoming audio and searchable in the exact same ways, because it
So
fundamentally is going to be text. But
I wanted you to distinguish that. No, I didn't want to cut you off, but I just wanted you to distinguish that the rooms that aren't recorded, they are text or not, or are they saved in Twitter's hard drives or whatever, or
they're saved
servers,
as audio files, and those audio files are converted to text, which are then indexed
even if you're not recording them?
with
I didn't
time.
know that.
Great question. If they're saved without your consent, uh, Clubhouse has said that they are for like 24 hours or 48 hours, just for safety purposes. If somebody were to flag something and call in and say, "Hey, yesterday I was verbally abused in this room or harassed or whatever, and then security can go back and listen to it, and then from what I understand, they don't save them for more than a day or two for that specific purpose.
It's called telemetry data. Okay, so we're keeping it for telemetry. And the interesting part, if they go this direction, I'm going to become an influencer on day one because I'm going to host a fireside chat with Trump and Obama.
Can I ask you a question, Tyler?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay, so for you, Tyler, who has been uploading tech news around the world on YouTube for the past 1 year, what does this mean to you?
Nothing really, because
I'm
well,
just somebody like you. I'm just giving as an
somebody like me.
example.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what it
yeah.
means is people
So
can now make valuable content without having to write blog posts or make videos. Today, meaning yesterday or last year, if you wanted to monetize on the web, you would either need to convert your thoughts into text or video, because there is monetization tools in the form of ad networks for text, right? You can put ads on websites and make money from that. Then somebody figured out they made a video ad network. YouTube dominated that space. YouTube puts video ads into the middle of your videos, so you can upload video content, participate in their video ad network, and monetize that way, as a lot of YouTubers do. Then you have photo ad networks in the form of Instagram. So you can monetize if you create in text first, chronologically, going back to the beginnings of the web. And by the way, shout out to my buddy Jason to be the first to run an ad on a blog. And it was Volvo in a skyscraper ad, for those who don't have time to look up the origin story of the first ad on a blog. And he got a lot of shit for that, and people debated that very strongly at the time, of the poisoning the well of running ads on blogs. And anyway, we went from text with visual ads to videos with video ads interstitialed, and then more recently Instagram and photos with photo ads. And now we're going to go into audio and audio ads. And you have that in Spotify, but the ad money is going to Spotify, not to the content creators themselves. It's kind of by proxy. But in the near future, you will have podcasters with a audio ad network. We just read the announcement. This is huge kind of news, and it was predicted yesterday when we read about Spotify going deeper into podcasting. I said YouTube's going to have to do the same. Watch for YouTube to start promoting their audio and podcasting. And then here it is today, literally today, 48 hours later. We just read it. It was a deck that was leaked that YouTube is sharing with their partners now about the podcast, youtube.com/podcasts, where they're going to allow podcasters to share their RSS URL. They're going to suck in all of your historical podcasts and enable you to monetize them by adding an audio ad network, very much like Spotify does. But you're going to get part of that money, just like YouTubers do. So we can now add YouTube and audio to the ways people can monetize content, because I don't like me, to answer your question, Cheryl, what does it mean to me? Well, there's me and lots of other people who don't like writing blog posts. That was never our thing. So we could never really monetize that way. And we weren't very fond of making videos either, despite the fact that many of you know, I was the first paid YouTube content creator. But I don't really like making videos.
Same.
So
Yeah.
I don't. So, and I'm not very fond of Instagram and posting photos. And I'm not a paid.
And I'm sure you were great at posting videos and actually making video content, but just some of us just don't like it, honestly.
It's just a lot of hassle. And it's a lot of work. Audio is somewhat magical in that I don't feel like this is work at all, honestly. And it could be very valuable content that can be searchable. And this is where it gets crazy, because the real monetization is not in delivering an ad right now. For example, if I were to say this episode of Tech News Around the World sponsored by Subway sandwiches, that in itself, can't really monetize to any significant degree doing it that way. However, if there's an intelligent ad network where the listener is exposed to an ad that is targeted to them, so
Mid-roll.
mid rolls, pre rolls, exit rolls, where the ad that they're listened to is targeted to them, so it gets a much higher click through rate, and the advertiser is willing to pay a lot more for the targeted ad, and it lives in perpetuity, and my content is discoverable based on searching through Google. Holy shit, am I now reaching millions of potential listeners every day if I have a significant library of content? And bada boom, bada bing. I can do that by providing that to YouTube, just by giving them the RSS feed, letting them suck it in. They start throwing ads in the middle of my content. They start sending people to my content, and now I've got this monetizable asset that, you know, work.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about the way that Spotify does it, but the way YouTube does it is actually so much more effective in the way that you know the way people's shopping and buying habits are. So yeah, that's
I wonder if this has anything to do with them losing Joe Rogan to Spotify, because I mean, it could be hey, if you get canceled, Joe Rogan, because people are upset all the time on Spotify, he can come back.
I have an
Joe
idea for
Rogan can
you,
easily
Tyler.
make another deal like that's with YouTube if that works out. And
I have an idea for you, Tyler. You get your Subway sandwich sponsorship, right? And get the affiliate links. And then at the beginning of the podcast, at the beginning of Tech News Around the World, tell everybody, please order a sandwich now while listening to listening to Tech News Around the World. So every order, you get a card. So you can reach out to all the Subway sandwich lovers all around the world. How's that?
Better is that they hear an ad based on something that Google knows they are already likely to buy. Google's going to find a much better ad than I ever can, because I can only pick one ad for all the listeners. It means it's not targeted. So, like,
yeah,
5% of
if
the 5% of the listeners give a shit about Subway sandwiches. Google is
Or
going to pick.
McDonald's?
Google's going to pick the best ad for every single individual separately.
And every
legitimately
country, yes, whatever they have, right,
someone just
available in
clipped
their
that as
country.
well. So yeah,
And then you
it's
get a
actually quite
percentage
legitimate.
commission, right? Well done, great.
No, you don't necessarily get a percentage per ad. You get and I don't know whether it even works
No,
with
per
click
order.
throughs. Oh yeah, yeah,
At the
per order.
beginning, Tyler will say, please order your food while listening to Tech News Around the World, right? Let's eat
I'm just
together.
saying the tired game of podcasts saying this podcast sponsored by this shitty brand you don't care about and some other 5 other brands you don't give a shit about is over. And the
Yeah,
amount of money
literally.
that podcasters can make will go up 300x, 500x, 700, 800, 1000x, 10x.
Tyler, can I introduce something that you said earlier, which is the social commerce part of it, where you can create live social rooms based upon particular products and get people to buy, which is the consumer activation thing, right? Which is getting people to one place at any one time and then getting them to do something, which is buy a particular product, right? And that is like it's very effective because there's a lot of people on YouTube already that make a lot of money just by live streaming on YouTube. So just in that same aspect, if it's like a makeup brand or a makeup consumer that doesn't like to create YouTube videos, but they are very interested in social audio, but there's no ad network for social audio yet, and now YouTube has it, it is more effective because then they're selling Mac makeup and all of these other things, and it's better for their consumer activation.
Okay,
So you're
so
talking about an audio QVC?
yeah,
Literally,
yeah, but still, it won't matter now that audio as a medium will be monetizable through targeted advertising. People are going to be finding all kinds of interesting content to upload, essentially. So, the next tweet Evan found from Daily Mail is that Russian jets violated Swedish airspace, were equipped with nuclear weapons. The flyover near the island of Gotland, which we've talked about here in this room multiple times in recent days. We told you that Russia wants Gotland. Russia's flying jets over Gotland with nuclear weapons, according to the Daily Mail.
I'm terrible with geography. Can you remind me? Is that the port?
No, Gotland is an island in the Baltic between Sweden and the Baltics, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and just above Poland. It's kind of just sitting right there in the middle of the Baltics, a little closer to Sweden, which is why Sweden correctly owns it. And it would be very militaristic, strategically very valuable real estate, which is why Russia would love to have it, because whoever controls Gotland could control the Baltics if they were going to be assholes about it. Sweden is anything but an asshole, so they don't flex their abilities of Gotland. They've turned it into this incredibly picturesque postcard village, which is totally stunning. Everyone should go see it in the summer at some point. But the idea that Russia is now showing that our suspicions were correct yet again. We knew Russia wants Scotland, and the fact that Russia is flying over it with nuclear bombs is all the evidence that I need for that. That's really concerning, and it has the Swedish foreign minister and defense ministers all making comments about how terribly upsetting and rude that is. And that's some real that's when you know the Swedes are furious, when they let you know you did something rude.
Yeah, and to my understanding, Sweden aren't punks, like in the way where they will just roll over in that type of way on this particular subject.
No, this is what's so concerning is Sweden hasn't been in conflict for hundreds of years because they're masterful at avoiding it, as they did with Hitler, where they actually monetized Hitler. They're perhaps the only country that did, selling him iron, for example.
The best ad work before Google? Is that what you just said? I don't know. That's crazy.
Right. So my point is that Swedes are masterful at avoiding conflicts, and that's going to be challenging with somebody like Vladimir Putin when he wants to take your island, because the Swedish proclivity is going to be to invite him for a very beautiful lunch and ask him why he feels the need to take that island. And they're going to they're going to try and talk him to death. And they're going to schedule a meeting for the first meeting is going to be to schedule the subsequent series of meetings where they're going to talk about this endlessly.
Meta meetings brought to you by Sweden.
Or a lunch with a little added cesium might be more speaking their language.
Wait, meetings about meetings?
No, polonium for appetizers.
So, Tyler, how quickly do you think NATO is going to see Sweden's application?
Yeah, that's the other interesting development is the NATOization of the Finland and Sweden secretly. Of course, they can't dare. By the way, there is one political candidate who is now running openly as of yesterday. That I believe it's the moderates. Who it's one of the big political parties in Sweden, and their platform is we want to join NATO. So if you want to join NATO, vote for our party, because they have basically 8 parties, but really like 3 big ones. And one of the 3 big ones is now saying we want to join NATO party, because that's quickly become the dominant issue in Swedish politics is, are they going to join NATO or not? So there you go.
On a
Wait,
side
is
note,
NATO like the Queen in Queen Elizabeth in the 1800s, where she united Europe basically? Because that's what happened, right? Like the Russian oligarchs.
The Sweden is correctly concerned about its ability to fend off Russia, so they need some support, and they're watching what's happening in Ukraine in horror, in fear that they would suffer the same fate, where the rest of the world would stand by, sitting on their hands, as Putin has his way with Sweden, because Sweden, unlike Ukraine, would not be standing up to Russian soldiers firing into a crowd. Swedes have far better things to do than to stand down Russian soldiers with M16s and Kalashnikovs.
Hey,
Will
Tyler.
that politician be targeted by Putin and taken down even before he have a chance to win it?
Say again?
I say, will that politician who is running,
No, Navalny.
he'll be targeted and taken down by Putin before he have a chance to win it, because Putin doesn't want Sweden to be NATO, right?
Right.
He
Yep. So
doesn't
you're
like
saying there's one
NATO
politician trying to
expansion.
run with that flag?
No, well, he doesn't like NATO expansion. Period. Right? It's
So
not necessarily about that, but
we just explained exactly that.
yeah,
Those politicians better be careful with all those radioactive pens around. Somebody might get poked.
Yeah, and
I
Tyler,
just came back.
Yeah.
Slap.
Tyler,
Yeah.
doesn't Sweden have a little bit of a border directly with Russia? I mean, Finland's got
No,
a long.
Finland does. Norway does.
I thought
yeah,
there was a small part, but I just haven't looked back at the map. I thought there was a real small part with Sweden.
No.
no.
See, I
Fin-
told you
That
you need a bunker in Sweden.
that's why it's also odd that it's kind of happening this way, and I wonder how the meetings will actually go. But Sweden isn't necessarily a strategic spot for Putin, and if Putin actually does want to expand into other areas, then that is a real threat to the rest of Europe. Honestly, that is very bad. But it would be almost impossible to hold or take two countries at once. So that won't be for like the next 12 months, possibly, if you think about it militaristically.
I wonder what kind of Nazis are in Sweden, according to Putin's propaganda team. That'll be
Ooh,
interesting.
you just really touched a button that the Swedes were hoping nobody would ever think of. That's too hot for TV. That one.
Where's Johan? Where's Johan? Come back, Johan.
By the way, let me address that one head on for a second, because the Swedes can handle it. As I just said, one of the parties, the moderates, are now going to be the party of NATO, right? If you want, they're attaching themselves to that major issue, and if you're pro NATO, vote for the moderates. We're going to make that our main issue, right? Okay. Well, prior to this being the big issue for Swedes, now post Ukraine, the previous big issue for Swedes was refugees and immigrants. And one of the parties made it their main issue, and this was the Swedish Democrats, who are very anti-immigrant and very anti-refugees, whose origins are directly tied to the Nazis. So,
Wait, the Swedish were Nazis? I didn't even know that.
no, there was one of the political parties' origins are a Nazi party.
Okay, my
Dun
apologies.
dun dun.
So, the next article, speaking of Sweden, is an article from the New York Times. It says, can controlling vehicles make streets safer and more climate friendly? Sweden has long been at the forefront of road innovation and is again leading the way with trials of technology known as geofencing. And it talks about a man drove a stolen truck into a crowded shopping district in central Stockholm and crashed into a department store, killing 4 people and injuring 15 others. Now, I swear to, holy shit. I cannot believe that this just happened. Because this is a New York Times article about what geofencing is. The whole entire article is about geofencing. Geofencing is a virtual tool which software uses GPS and similar technology to trigger a pre-programmed and real-time action in vehicles to control their movements within a geographical area. It can regulate a vehicle's speed within a zone, determine whether a vehicle belongs there, and automatically switch hybrid vehicles to electric driving mode, etc. So the article is about the power of geofencing, and it could enable countries to control vehicles, especially when we get into electric autonomous vehicles. The being able to control them in particular geographies is going to be very useful technology.
I can
Now,
see that becoming a standard very quickly because of all
right.
these
Well,
crowd.
they're talking about Stockholm at the beginning of this article, and the first sentence, I'm going to pin this to the top of the room because I honestly I knew that the article was about geofencing and autonomous vehicles. What I never would have suspected was that they would open this article with the uh, terrorist attack, which was the biggest news in Sweden in many, many years, which was a immigrant refugee from Uzbekistan, as I remember, in this case, who drove down one of Stockholm's busiest walking streets, where cars aren't really allowed, and plowed into people. And you can't be more central Stockholm than where this guy did this. It's like the Times Square of Stockholm. We just drove right through the middle of a walking street and was plowing down people. And this is a very, incredibly sore memory. For myself, everybody knew people who were injured in this in central Stockholm. It's not Stockholm is only 1 million people, mind you. So this art, I'm just, after making the comments that I did about, the immigrants and the refugees, that for this next article to start off with this retelling of this tragic incident, it says the terrorist attack prompted the Swedish government to investigate how digital technology could be used to prevent these kinds of incidents in the future. It began a 4-year research program to test one type called geofencing in urban environments. So that's what this article is about. As you can probably imagine, the Swedish Democrats, made a lot of hay out of the fact that this Uzbekistan immigrant, was basically the only terrorist that Sweden's had to deal with in a very long time. And thank God that it's as frequent as it is, and it's just a tragedy that happened at all. It really shook Stockholmers quite strongly.
I don't understand how this is even practical, because you'd have to disable all manual override. And if you didn't disable all manual override of automated systems, then the only ones affected by this are delivery trucks who can't get to the most convenient delivery site.
I'm not sure, John. I was going to say almost the opposite. That a lot of modern cars have just simple modern cars have a speed limiter, and I don't know. It depends on the vehicle, but often that speed limiter just means that at this designated speed limit, the throttle just stops allowing you to increase speed. So therefore, making a box that can do this is very, very simple. Can be very cheap. I mean, tens of dollars worth of hardware, and you can even imagine it. Yeah, basically, it needs a GPS or to connect to the car's GPS, and then it needs to talk to the car's CAN bus and instruct the speed limit to be in place. Now, you're right about manual controls. The user has the option to cancel the speed limit on the stalks, on the steering wheel and stuff. So that and there's more than just speed limits to consider. There's where you steer. There's all sorts of other things to think about. Well, there's really only two inputs on a car: speed stroke brake and left stroke right. But yeah, on one hand, it's very simple, and you can imagine doing it, and you can imagine selling it to insurance companies so that people get a discount on their premium based on the fact that they have one of these things in the car. On the other hand, your point about when you take it to the extreme, your point about manual override is very potent, because what happens with the steering, for example, if you're going to prevent people from steering off the road, then you have to disconnect the steering wheel from the wheels, which even in a Tesla is not done. Cars' brakes and steering wheels are still physically connected; their throttles aren't necessarily. But anyway, just some rambles.
It also creates a
No, I
whole
thought.
new vector for hacking. I mean, everybody forgets all the car hacking that was done. Changing a geofence doesn't take much. I mean, have been very
Exactly.
crafty with
Exactly.
the hacking stuff.
I
I
just don't
mean,
see how this can work.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
either.
was I was thinking about that and I thought I was wrong with it, but it just seemed like an operation like this, like just as a city planner and looking at operations, like how would you actually implement these urban roads to be geofenced, right? Because there's such a high tolerance with people versus vehicles, right? Where there's a lot of transit that happens, but there's also a lot of people, so it would seem like there'd be a lot of gridlocking, maybe.
All it takes is three 3-meter satellite dishes to change that. So maybe about a 10 grand investment, and then you could be hacking the geofence.
Yeah, but that's already then quite a complex operation. It's no longer a lone wolf driving a vehicle into a crowd of people. I think here the mitigation is, hey, let's try to avoid people dying at all, and then reducing that number, because the problem is that the person not only hits the pedestrians, but they plow through a large portion of them without anyone even being able to stop them in any way. A similar thing happened in Canada a few times as well, and similar discussions are happening here. The question is the geofence, can it be extended to be kind of conditions like if this, then that? So as long as it's in a highly regulated area like the walk space, then I think it could be done for some areas, not most, but some.
Yeah, you also don't have to rely entirely on GPS. You can have inertial navigation as a second input to the navigation system, which a lot do anyway. And then if that disagrees with GPS to a certain point, you could stop the car. But I guess there's completely different approaches to this. One is, have the majority of people have a device that moderates their driving and help them with the insurance premiums in return or something. If you did that, and the majority of people are doing that, you could potentially at a city level flag up the cars that haven't opted into that system. And then they could be the ones that you're suspicious of or contain. I mean, at the other extreme, you could only let cars into the city, based on bollards or toll booths or
Yeah,
whatever,
exactly.
based on some authenticated, you know, uh, proof that they have the right systems installed and that those systems are in good working order. And with cryptography, zero knowledge proofs, and so forth, I can imagine that that's not beyond the realms of reason to make it very, very hard, even for a fairly determined actor, to fake the fact that they have this digital certificate that says, yeah, hey, I'm operating a car that is managed and is in good working order. And
Yeah, Ben, you understand that with like just being in London and our urban environment where it's very high tolerance between people and cars, and the places people cross is very particular depending on where you are. And there's just in city planning, just like when you're creating roads and transit and all of these things, having to cooperate with one another, there is just a simple non-tech solution, which is diverting traffic away from pedestrian areas, right, and making roads that aren't that don't coincide with where people would walk, stand, or be at. But then there is, this tech solution, which it seems like it's a high risk, high tolerance, but there is an upside, right? So there's a very good upside to being able to understand it. However, like Tom has just like said and iterated, it's pretty like for someone who understands this, they're able to hack these geofences and being able to change them. So there's a lot more security that's necessary, especially with secure areas like urban environments.
You'd be shocked the number of satellites that are out there that are completely unencrypted.
I do agree with the low tech solutions, though. Just planters, heavy planters in the right place. It's already done a lot in any sensitive building in a major city. If you look carefully, you'll see that there are nice places to sit outside, but they don't have greater than a 1.3 meter spacing between them. They're concrete-like things to sit on. They're all of these things are anti-ram raiding, anti-vehicle. And there's a lot of this in London. There's a lot of this on the bridges in London. Unfortunately, it's even here in Cambridge. There's our beautiful King's Parade behind King's College, a very iconic scene, 800-year-old plus college, has now got an anti-terror, and this is the dark side of it, has now got an anti-terrorism barrier, which looks just horrible. It's a big, massive lump of metal that looks really quite unsightly. So you can do it wrong, but you can also do it in such a way that what you're using to block is planters and concrete benches effectively and stuff like that. And just look around in the city when you pay attention. These are all over the place. They ring fence any valuable buildings already. So.
Okay, next tweet is from Sharon from the New York Times that the SEC takes aims at SPACs. A new proposal casts an even bigger shadow over the once booming market for blank check firms. And I imagine, the overall performance is perhaps being hindered by the big downturn in tech over the past several months, and that's got people licking some wounds. And the SEC is taking notice and wants to make sure nobody's falling victim to any kind of unfairness. That's going to be interesting to see what they decide out of that one. The next is from Pat, that Joe Biden is very close to announcing a major release of U.S. oil reserves, which would be the third and potentially biggest since November. So the headline is that Joe Biden close to announcing another big release of oil reserves. because Russia, nobody's getting that stuff from Russia no more. And then BB found this one that a Twitter user has been sentenced to 150 hours of community service in the UK for posting an offensive tweet. So this one tweet is now costing this person 150 hours of community service. Joseph Kelly, 36 years old, deleted the tweet after just 20 minutes, but he's still going to have to do 150 hours of community service. Kelly was found guilty under Section 127 of the UK's Communications Act for a grossly offensive tweet.
Yeah, that speaks to the idea of freedom of speech and the hate speech laws. In fact, in Canada and the U.S., it's about objectively, does a reasonable person find this offensive or problematic? Whereas the UK has a more subjective interpretation that it is primarily up to the person who you were making the offense at or of, who then decides whether they felt it was insulting. So that paradigm to me was kind of shocking when I visited the UK. So you got to really be careful what you say over there.
So the question is, what did he say? Well, here it is. Interestingly, the Verge blog is able to quote what he said without any, you can quote what's something terrible that somebody else said. So he became a national figure in the UK after walking 100 laps around his garden before his 100th birthday. Oh, this is a different person named Captain Sir Tom Moore, a British Army officer who raised money for the NHS during the pandemic. And Mr. Moore became a national figure in the UK after walking 100 laps around his garden before his 100th birthday. He was later knighted by the Queen. The day after his death, this bonehead named Kelly tweeted, quote, "The only good Brit soldier is a dead one. Burn, old fella, burn." Kelly was found guilty in February last year and faced possible jail time. His case brought attention to an often criticized piece of UK legislation that allows social media users to be prosecuted for sending grossly offensive messages. Even though he himself deleted it 20 minutes after sending it. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervision and 150 hours of unpaid work in the form of Scottish Community Payback Order. Okay. The next one's from BB, that Baidu and 4 other Chinese firms are being added to the SEC delisting list. The SEC's possible delisting push targeting Chinese companies brings further uncertainty to volatile Chinese tech shares. Well, even more interestingly, this is further evidence of the great decoupling that I've referred to nearly every day for the past year. And as if you needed even more evidence of that, watch this one from the other side. This one from NPR, National Public Radio in the US, a very reputable news outlet, which says China is tightening restrictions, which they're known to do, but this time they are barring Chinese scholars from attending conferences in other countries. An international conference was supposed to gather some of the most promising and most established Asia studies scholars from around the world in Honolulu. Instead, at least 5 Chinese scholars were prevented from attending, even virtually via Zoom. Why? Well, according to 4 people familiar with the matter, they said that the Chinese security officers and education officials directly intervened, citing education regulations published during the global pandemic, which require all Chinese scholars to receive university permission to attend any international event in person or online. Quote, "After years of encouraging and funding scholars to participate internationally, the intensifying controls of recent years are now full scale, and academic work, at least in China, is to be quarantined from the rest of the world," says a history professor at Georgetown University who attended the conference. Quote, "The doors have slammed shut fast," he says. In one case, a group of police officers visited the home of a scholar in China after they had presented their research paper to an online Zoom panel earlier in the week, questioning the scholar for hours, in part because they considered the title of the paper to be quote-unquote incorrect. It was deeply frightening said one academic who attended the panel but requested anonymity to protect the identity of the scholar involved.
Ouch. So I'm sorry. We have decided that the title of your paper is incorrect, so we're going to have an extended conversation about that. Right this way, comrade.
Right. But interestingly, this is, as I said, China participating in the decoupling, where they're now no longer allowing scholars to participate in international gatherings, even online.
So not only can they not speak to their own research, they can't listen to the research presented by others.
That's what one of the quotes later in the article directly points out, that this is a tremendous blow to Chinese scholars of all kinds.
You can't do science that way. It
Right.
doesn't work.
Precisely what the scientist at the end of the article tries to point out.
And the reason why the Chinese have been so competitive is that they have kind of sent over their people. Their people have gotten educated in the West, and then they've brought back that infrastructure. And it's about the network effects of academia that make it so powerful. Once you remove that, I think it's the beginning of the end.
So
Well,
then
we're in the colder war now, right? This is the colder war.
the the next one is from Jeff G. from South China Morning Post, that Shanghai is now expected to extend the Shanghai lockdown beyond Friday. The lockdown of an area of 5.7 million people announced on Sunday had been due to expire tomorrow. But BB, if you could give us an update, from what I understand, it's now 24 million people in Shanghai that are under lockdown.
Yeah, let me check the actual number right now because the positive cases still rising. So we heard some news from the Chinese people themselves saying that because originally Shanghai, you can say city councils, they try to do what's it like in like for what we do in Taiwan, that we only quarantine the positive cases, but right now there are some political issues that they got orders to lock down. So for the zero COVID cases policy still continues. So I've tweeted another post that I think Tyler you retweeted. It's about widely insisted this zero cases policy because it was issued by President Xi himself. So it's like they have no way to run from this policy. So I think they're yeah, just like you read from the news, they are extending this lockdown until there is an obvious, you say, the number on the cases where at least not rising up as soon as what it appears right now. So let me check the number. I will tell you later.
Okay, so thank you. The next one is from David, that the U.S. is removing the human control requirements for autonomous vehicles. The move paves the way for self-driving cars without seats or steering wheels or human controls. So here come the autonomous vehicles without humans.
Tyler, can I ask a question about the conferences? Does it
Yes.
also count for that people from abroad are not allowed to attend their conferences? Because in my inbox, basically every day, I get an invitation to attend some obscure conference in China. And my sense is that this could be a major source of revenue for them, or, yeah, of idea exchange and that and so forth. So does it go both ways?
No, it doesn't make any reference to limiting people attending conferences in China.
Wait,
And
is this
be
China's
sure.
response to people saying that they are to blame, and they were talking about the legitimacy of the Chinese scholars within during the like early COVID era we had?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Like in the early COVID era, there was a lot of blaming China and people in China and all of these other things. So would this be considered China's response, or is it like not even related at all?
They don't make a good case for precisely why China is doing this. I don't think it's purely conjecture on my part or anyone else that they're doing this It's counter. There's no clear, obvious reason why they're doing it.
It's the great IP wall of China.
But yeah, like yeah, it's yeah, scholarship is, general and social and communal, so it just goes against the tenets of that, doesn't it? So that's just unfortunate, honestly.
Fun
So
flash from the past. There's a program called the Boxer Indemnity Scholarship. This was formed in response in 1908 from Theodore Roosevelt after the Boxer Rebellion, where there was 8 nations that invaded China. USA was very unique compared to other countries because rather than saying, "Hey, you now owe us a fraction of money for us conquering you," essentially what we did is we said you can and just instead of doing that, instead you can pay us back just by sending us your best scholars, and we'll pay for that scholarship having that come over. I'm bastardizing this a little bit. There actually was some things, but this is almost 100-year tradition of China sending scholars to USA to study. When you're seeing this sort of pushback, this is a reversal of a very long tradition there, and there's some interesting longer term consequences from that historically. Anyways, just a little fun thing. Boxer indemnification scholarship.
okay, next one is from Pat from the Washington Post. The headline reads: "The military wants AI to replace human decision making in battle." DARPA, the innovation arm of the U.S. military, wants AI to make battlefield medical decisions, raising red flags from some experts.
Yeah, there's no problem there at all whatsoever.
Well,
It's not like
as long
sets
as it's
have.
not raising white flags, they can raise red flags all they want. Just keep your AI hands away from the white flags. um,
And
then,
Tyler, quick
But
update. They started. We said earlier that Shanghai is split into western and eastern area, and they started today for the western area already. So already, 16 million people are gonna be asked to do the PCR test. So yeah, so it's like the whole city is in lockdown right now. Yeah.
right,
they're going to have a PCR based economy.
30. What is it? How many million, BB?
16 million people
And there are
involved.
reports that some of the Omicron descendants are escaping PCR and antigen testing.
Hmm.
Yes, because BA2 is is detected as well.
Okay. The next one is from
But the
Thomas.
question is, even if they are tested positive, do they stay at home or they need to go facilities? But is there a facility for 60 million people? Or maybe half of it?
Yeah, but they just like called Fangchang Yuan, so it's like just a field hospital. But they just send people in without treatment. That's how they said. So they're left there without any medication. So they are quarantined as well, sent to some places, but without treatment. So there are some stories. Some news said, if you are not PCR tested and you can't prove that you are negative, then some woman died because the ambulance refused to send her to the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah,
She
actually,
died on the street.
oh, I'm sorry, baby.
I'm done. Thank you. Continue,
Yeah,
please.
yes, Rachel.
I just a few comments. This whole thing is really weird. First of all,
I think she has a phone coming in.
it seems the whole maneuver was entirely choreographed by the central government. Shanghai government is very effective in controlling the whole COVID, right? And it was very well known. It was actually highly publicized in China. But this whole maneuver, Shanghai government has no say. And I have a lot of classmates who are essentially doctors in Shanghai. From some of their comments, it just looks very, very uncoordinated, ineffective. I think there's something else going on. But we just leave it as that. Right now, there is no Fangtang hospital. I mean, most of the hospitals or facilities who can take patients are already full. So they essentially just shut down those all the development or the compounds, shut down the whole city.
If you're positive, you're positive. You stay where you are. That's kind of what this is. It's very odd,
Okay.
and
Well,
there's no death.
Is
Well,
There's very
and
few.
as a partial explanation. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I mean there is very few, or if barely any, COVID-related death. That's another thing. Also, not very many bad cases. So, but they're still doing this.
I was just
Yeah,
wondering whether
there's zero.
perhaps.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I had the mic unmuted. I just wanted to make a quick comment about what Rachel was saying, just to consider whether maybe China, in locking down so tightly, actually stops the West from knowing a much more detailed view of what is happening.
And just like said, and just like Rachel said, the central government, kick in to take over because originally Shanghai did just like I said, late only quarantine positive cases, not a full lockdown because full lockdown is normal in other provinces in China. So, the central government decided to apply this zero COVID cases policy into Shanghai as well. That's why uh, yeah, in Shanghai you can see it ridiculously. Um, I don't know
There,
much.
Actually, what
there,
I'm saying is this is not about COVID.
Oh,
there,
you
I
there
have
is
leave
some
it at that.
controversy.
there is a simple explanation, and the simple explanation would be as follows: China is quite proud of their zero COVID policy, how they contained it during the Olympics, and now they're the hotspot globally. And had they gone ahead like other zero COVID nations and vaccinated everybody aggressively, this would be a big ho hum and nothing would have happened. But what's happening is the number of people in advanced age who have not been vaccinated is high. And make no mistake, Omicron will kill you if you're elderly and vulnerable. And I think it's an embarrassment to the pride they have in the zero COVID policy. So that this overreaction could be as simple as saving face from a policy that worked initially but can't work against the BA2 Omicron variant, which is 50% more contagious than the Omicron variant, which was twice as contagious as the Delta variant. And you just can't contain it. So this could be literally a cover for the fact that they dropped the aggressiveness of their vaccination campaigns at the wrong time.
I'm curious about Rachel's. Is it Rachel or Raquel? I just want to make sure I get the name right. Rachel. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I'm curious about her hypothesis that it's something else other than COVID, and because there's a couple of friends I have in Shanghai, and in generally speaking, it's a pretty tightly, you know, oiled machine when they do things, right? And you know, it's cascaded down from Beijing if there's a message to come down. Very surprisingly for people who have not worked in China, surprisingly efficient and surprisingly consultative, actually, when messages come down from Beijing on business or anything. And this one, my friends tell me similarly to Rachel saying that is that it's very confused. You know, local government doesn't know what they're doing sometimes, and they're getting instructions. So yeah, I'm very curious as to why they want to do that. We just have to keep an eye on it. It's possible it could be something else that's going on.
Is it
I think
coincidental that it's happening at the time the economy's faltering and the disinformation about what's actually going on in Ukraine is getting breakthrough?
yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's probably a combination of all of that. But it is true. It's very uncoordinated, and obviously not everybody in Shanghai knows what's going on. I think it's entirely possible this is some major plans. And most of the people in Shanghai, even the lower level officers, they don't know. So, but it's definitely pure medical, pure COVID related. I think that I'm almost certain. There's something else going on.
There
hey,
doesn't happen to be a virology lab in Shanghai, is there?
I don't think so.
Shanghai during the war was very, and before the war has always been very commercial, very forward thinking, outward looking, very buzzy, very exciting. You know, during the early part of the last century, Shanghai was extremely exciting. And since the economic buildup within China, Shanghai has been a most amazing place to be for advancement, for business, for all of that. One of the theories could be that this is an opportune moment to clamp down on people who might be complaining that common prosperity and the sort of closing down of or the hardening of controls over people in business maybe in the background somewhere.
Pat, I think one of the things that makes, sorry, have you finished? Sorry, Pat. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, one of the things that makes me think what you're just saying there is just from my experience, you know, the government doesn't like protest, right? Any form of protest.
Okay.
You know, people protesting outside stores being shut, right? You know, I had 15 phone calls from Beijing, and you know, and so I'm curious about uh, headlines that will emerge over the next few weeks. I'm just curious from, you know, places they don't expect to emerge, but that just says that people are discontent and there's some protesting going on. And what better way to calm down, you know, the protests than to just lock people down, you know?
Well, and Xi may be aware that Russia may explode with more protesters than they have jail shells and bullets.
Yeah, if they that we could wait them out, let them waste all their resources in Ukraine. Anyway, um, there's a bunch of articles, tweets I want to share here. One is from Thomas Tong from CNN. It says dangerous chemicals found in food wrappers at major fast food restaurants and grocery store chains. Fast food wrappers and takeout containers at major food chains contain dangerous chemicals known as PFAS, which, if you've been following that one, it's the forever chemicals that are involved in plastic softeners, essentially, that are we're now realizing are pretty much embedded in everything, and often called forever chemicals because they do not break down in the environment. PFAS are used in food packaging to prevent grease and water from soaking through food wrappers and beverage cups, and can be found in the ink used to print logos and instructions on food containers. And the Consumer Reports investigation collected 118 food packaging products sold by 24 companies in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. It tested those products for organic fluorine, a marker of PFAS. Researchers then sent samples of products with the highest levels to independent laboratories that could perform more specific tests, and regulatory limits for how much PFAS food packaging should contain can vary greatly. However, Denmark set a much lower regulatory limit of 20 ppm. In Denmark, we've seen both a decrease in non-compliance by industry. So what was the result? Indicator levels in the 300s and 400s were found, and indicators in the 200s were found in chicken nuggets at McDonald's, for example. However, all the companies listed had additional food packaging that tested at levels below 200. Four companies, Arby's, Nathan's, McDonald's, and Stop and Shop, also sold food in packaging that had no detectable levels of PFAS, the report said. So,
So
anyways,
it leaches on the food or something, or
that's the implication, yeah. Two random facts here. The oil industry, fossil fuels are looking for what happens after energy, and burning is not nearly as favorable. There's you've got about a certain number of petrochemicals they use for all sorts of things, but plastics is one of the other things that they could supposedly go towards. The problem is that the quantity to move would be absolutely obscene with the amount of scale for that amount of polymer. So there's a question about whether or not the industry could ever grow as large, especially when you have these negative effects from the environment. Now, there's a difference between microplastics or the stuff that gets absorbed versus macroplastics, but I don't know if the distinction will be a thing. Another thing that's a little bit interesting is when you look at the fertility rates and how this stuff can affect fertility. It's something that has a macro level scale. If you start looking at population effects, that has some disturbing implications for long term stuff.
especially when you look at the timing of introduction and such. But that's a longer conversation, but fun things to factor in.
Okay, next one. Well, actually, in the same article, it says a McDonald's spokesperson said that less than 7.5% of McDonald's global food packaging contains PFAS at the end of 2020, and said that McDonald's was continuing its search for alternative materials that offered proper grease-resistant barriers with the goal of reducing deliberately adding PFASs by the end of 2025.
So they are aware, and those food labels that contain warnings about this content actually is contains that PFAS in it.
The
Yeah,
Guardian,
Gates still lives in there.
Evan shares this one from The Guardian about really alarming the rise of smart cameras used to catch maskless students at U.S. schools. Schools brought in surveillance cameras to monitor mask compliance and other COVID risks, and while masks are on their way out, the cameras aren't. So they brought in the cameras to catch the people who weren't following the masks, and now that the mask mandates are over, the cameras are still there. Gotcha! Gotcha. We found a good reason to cover the campus with cameras. And
Why are we putting kids through this hell?
You can
It's not like there's jobs on the other side for them anyways.
You can pry the cameras from my cold, dead robotic hands. The next one is from Thomas Tong from the BBC that Facebook drives skeptics towards climate denial. Facebook's algorithm can push some people towards disinformation and conspiracy theories, according to Facebook, according to the BBC. And Thomas found this one from The Verge. Oh, I'm going to save that for last. That's a great one. He found this one from CNN that what fruit can reduce heart attack risk, according to a study? Well, I'll save you the conundrum. It says you can replace margarine, butter, eggs, yogurt, and cheese and processed meats with avocados, which is now linked to lower risk of heart attacks. A new study finds avocados lower your risk of heart attacks. And Vox, for what it's worth, says that they did a piece about a new study shows the risks that can come from research into AI in biology, and they titled the piece "When Scientific Information is Dangerous," which makes sense when you notice when you follow Vox's headlines. They seem to not be a fan of facts or figures. The next one's from Jeff G. from CNN about the severe drought and mandatory water cuts are pitting communities against each other in some communities, particularly in Arizona, where some communities are facing a very real possibility of losing access to the precious water that remains. And it's only March, everybody. So enjoy the summer. And I will leave you on this very interesting article from The Verge. The headline
Tyler,
reads,
before you do that one, can I connect the last two with the drought and avocados? So
sure.
avocados may help your heart, but every avocado you eat represents a minimum of 60 gallons of water required. So we're facing droughts everywhere, and avocados are one of the thirstiest crops that exists.
This assumes pass through water cycling is a known technology. It's a few thousand years old. It's basic agriculture. For some reason, we don't use it.
Russian regulators say it's now going to fine Google for not removing videos of Ukraine war footage. Russia may fine Google up to 8 million rubles for showing what's going on in Ukraine. And now you know
How
why.
much are those worth now?
And they should just wait before they pay that, because it will just go down, right?
It'll be $1.50 by next year. Yeah. Okay, well, there you go. We got through all the tweets, and thank you to everybody who shared fantastic tweets and comments and insights and wisdoms that will be archived for decades, if not centuries to come. Thank you,
God
everybody.
help us all.
See you next time.
Take care,
Remember, y'all
everybody.
are awesome.
Nigel, what to say?